Good morning, everyone, on day 56 of lockdown. It's crazy when you say out 56, because that means you have to count to 56, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a lot of days of lockdown. Certainly, one of the greatest gifts that we have in lockdown is the ability to know that that friend that we've trusted for all these years, that radio in our home, is still there for us. And certainly, radio in South Africa remains unparalleled in terms of its continuous innovation and continuous striving to be absolutely brilliant. All of that was recognized beautifully a couple of weeks ago in the Radio Awards brought to you by Arena Events. And this morning, we're delving deep into what it is that makes some of the winners and chatting to some thought leaders in the space of radio and media buying as we begin to address the question, what turns advertisers on to radio? So think about it for a sec in your own mind. What turns advertisers on to radio? And to that effect, as we broadcast live this morning and engage with you in the comment section with your questions, we've got three people that are really turned on by radio, super turned on by radio. We've got an incredible panel for you this morning that we're going to engage with. Two of them Radio Award winners this year in major categories. Let's say hello to a man with lots of frames on his wall, Lloyd Motheray, the station manager of Hot 91.9 FM, Community Station of the Year, and a million other awards this year, and consistently always so impressive at the Radio Awards. Lloyd, are you wearing pants? It looks like you're at the office, so it would be very concerning if you're not.
I promise you I'm wearing pants and I will prove it. Oh, there you go.
We're off to a great start because you never know how these webinars can go. This year's PBS Station of the Year was Radio 2000. The SABC also scoped a dozen awards. And joining us is a group executive for SABC Radio, Nada Wachela. Nada, this morning, day 56 of lockdown, can you believe we're on day 56?
Hi, sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Can you believe we're on day 56, Nada? I mean, how did we get here?
I thought I would have gone crazy by now, but I'm starting to enjoy the peace and quiet.
Bar the radio that's probably turned on to a million stations, as your job would entail every single day. And you can't put the word advertise into a sentence on one of these broadcasts without speaking to a man that buys all the media and buys all that advertising. Joining us is Group MD of Park Advertising, Chris Botha. And Chris, also pants on this morning, eh?
No comment so far. You'll notice shirt and jersey, and I think that's as much as you're going to see today.
That's great. 56 minutes to go. You never know what could happen. It's all up to everyone commenting in the live stream. So if you want to get involved there with Chris in some way, shape, or form, then pop that comment through. All right. What turns advertisers on to radio? I want to kick it off with you, Chris, because you're a man that's responsible for a lot of money in the space of media in South Africa. Why does radio remain so top of mind when you are investing on behalf of your clients to get the maximum ROI?
I think for starters, radio has always been a medium that's provided massive reach, right? And instantaneous reach. You know, I think from an advertiser's perspective, if there's something you want to tell the whole world immediately, radio is one of those media. I always use the analogy with our clients that if you found out that today is the last day that Earth will survive, that there's going to be a comet that's going to strike it, which medium would you use to tell people? I think radio is probably the top of the list over there, right? So I think so that instantaneous reach, the fact that from an advertiser's perspective, it is relatively cheap to do from a production perspective. We'll talk about the media cost a little bit later on, but from a production perspective, it's a relatively easy, cheap medium to get on and quick. And then I think the second, and those are for me like the very logical reasons why radio works. I think the second part to it is the softer reasons. That in South Africa is massive, right? Is that, and for a lot of people, it's the only media that they have. It is a companion. It is that comfort. That relationship that people build with DJs is absolutely unbelievable. So I think that sense of companionship has been emphasized to the nth degree during the past 56 odd days, and which is one of the great strengths of radio.
Nada, I mean, you're responsible for a host of stations that are companions to millions and millions of South Africans. And certainly what Chris is saying becomes particularly relevant at a point like this, COVID-19, when everybody needs to be getting news and feel like we are in this together, because otherwise it just feels incredibly overwhelming. Talk to me for a second about sort of building advertising into that companionship in an authentic way. And if you want to put a COVID-19 spin on it, that would be great.
I think this period of COVID-19 is a period that has really stretched us to think outside the box and to think more deeply about the listener and what the listener needs right now. A lot of radio stations are interacting more on their social media platforms just to get that immediate reaction from the listeners, and for the listeners to share, what they are doing, what they are struggling with, what the challenges are. And in there, built in is already opportunities for advertisers, because everybody is doing something, and they're spending more time with their families, they're talking more with their friends, they are sharing more of their lives and how they are coping. So there's a lot of experiences that we were just letting pass us by in life that we're really paying attention to right now. But being the public broadcaster, what we have also sprung, to action to assist with in our country, considering, the developmental nature of our country, is the education. I mean, the first thing we thought of was all the children that have not had teachers in their classrooms all the time. We have a mandate. We're regulated by ICASA to produce a certain amount of educational programs per day. But we've, all the stations, they came up with ideas on how they can include every child, sort of increase the number of educational programs, especially curriculum-based educational programs. And that also, presents opportunities for advertisers who want to be seen to be doing something to assist the communities that are struggling. And education has become a very big part of what all the PBS stations are doing. There's more teachers that are volunteering to assist with certain subjects. There's subject advisors all over the country that are approaching radio stations. So education has become really big, and that has brought listeners closer to our stations. People really appreciate it when somebody steps in and assists them, when they are destitute.
I want to pick up on what Nado was saying with you, Lloyd, in terms of being forced to think out of the box, and an opportunity she was speaking about in terms of advertising. 56 days into lockdown, Hot 91.9 has done something groundbreaking called Lock and Load, which is almost a sales response and an advertising response to supporting small businesses in the context of COVID-19. And it really gives an interesting take on a community radio station to offer something like this. Tell us a little bit about this innovation. And then, Chris, I want your opinion on it, because Lloyd's got his own media buying happening now.
Yeah, thank you, Aria. In fact, Lock and Load is quite innovative. We talk to predominantly SMEs here at Hot 91.9, and one of the biggest problems they had was when we hit level 3, what do we do to get the economy going again? Obviously, price point was a huge concern. They didn't have big budgets to buy massive amounts of advertising. All they wanted to do was inform people that the stores are open and they've got these specials in place. So what we decided to do was make this a quick and easy approach to doing radio, where you could go quite simply to hot919.co.za, click on the Lock and Load deal, select the number of ads you'd want to buy. In the day, you could buy 1 ad today, you could buy 2 ads tomorrow, you pay for it on your credit card, we contact you in 20 minutes, we write out your script for you immediately, and within 2 hours, that ad goes to air. We launched it yesterday on the radio station. We've had a phenomenal response from new advertisers coming to the radio station saying, I love this, I'm getting people calling my store, and I'm pushing product out of my store. And we've hit it at the correct price point right now.
Chris, that's media buying at unprecedented speed. When you see an innovation like that, what's the conversation that happens at Park?
Look, I think it's awesome. I'm often reminded of the quote, I think it was Winston Churchill who said it, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And I think this is exactly what's happening, right? Where we're seeing this crisis coming in, and radio over the years, I believe, has gotten stuck in a rut to an extent, right? And I think one of the issues that radio struggles with, in my opinion, again, is price. I think radio is terribly overpriced at the moment. Now you're saying, well, listen, because of this crisis, you're offering SME advertisers the opportunity to advertise at the right price for them, which is competitive and inclusive, with a methodology that makes sure that they can get on air almost immediately. I think it's a fantastic solution. And I think it's a compliment to Lloyd and his team that they didn't let the good crisis go to waste, right? That they use this opportunity to reach out. And look, at this point in time, I think this is exactly what we need to start doing. I think that business as usual is a thing of the past. There's no such thing anymore. I think the concept of business unusual is very cliched, but very true going forward. And I think this is a great kickstart to it.
Nala, let's unpack what Chris is saying for a second in terms of kind of the demand on price, on innovation of that sales process. You know, I've always wondered, how is it that you formulate what your rate card is? You know, what are the metrics that go into kind of pricing the various stations that you work on? And how do you go about formulating that and then really having an honest conversation when the world is doing this? Do you have to become more pliable? Do you change? At what point are you influenced by advertising in the world around you in terms of the final product?
You know, previously, or the way we have been doing things is really being put to the test right now. Because previously it was, you know, all about numbers. You know, the bigger the radio station, the bigger the audience, and you know, that's where you put the premium price on the rate card. But right now, we're seeing a lot of programs or stations that have not been performing that well, picking up speed because of the kinds of content that they are delivering, their interaction, their social media following on specific programs or specific radio stations. And it shows you that, you know, there's something great happening, you know. So now we're paying attention even to the smaller stations. And I think this is when the patterns or the advertisers' preferences, you know, have to take precedence in terms of how we price our radio stations, because they're not just going with the biggest breakfast show anymore. They want a program that has traction on all the touch points on social media. They want that authentic voice, you know, that presenter that listeners believe in, that they trust, and all of those things. So we're reviewing the way we price our products right now. And like Chris said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Lloyd, is it fair to even still call radio when what the clients are demanding is the on-air advert, the social media execution, the video piece, the DJ promoting it on their platforms? I mean, are we doing an injustice to radio by calling it radio, or is it that the majority of the spend is on the actual airtime and then the other stuff is kind of just a part of making it a little bit more 360?
Yeah, I think radio is not just radio anymore. It's a multifaceted experience. It's a 360 experience with DJs engaging on their social platforms. And I think the bulk is spent on actual terrestrial radio right now. You know, radio is still, I look at it as talking to your best friend. And the way that I see it right now, especially with COVID-19, is that we've gone back to that. People are looking for that one-on-one experience, talking to your best friend. And that's where the true trust is coming through right now on radio. In fact, some interesting stats that I've been seeing is that more people are trusting in their radio stations because they believe the content is true coming out of that radio station, as opposed to social media coming out. You know, in terms of radio, in terms of the numbers, you know, what are clients looking for? What do they want? What do they need? I think in most cases right now, clients actually don't know what they want and what they need. But the true thing that they're really looking for is results and return on investment. I mean, you know, what most advertisers want is a radio component which pretty much drives response, which can be measured and fits in with their budget. I believe that the measurement of radio should not be, and I think this is a great platform to talk about it, should not be the traditional reach and frequency or RAMs, It's not about chasing the numbers, but more about who is listening, especially at this point in time. I was listening to something that Stan Katz said the other day, and I loved it in Stan Katz's words. He says, don't count the people you reach the people who count. It's about getting your message to the people who are able to transact with you.
Chris, you got to talk to me about this endless debate around RAMs and using that as the metric with which to price and build a pricing model. I mean, if not RAMs, then what? What do you tell the AE, the media buyer, who's trying to do 1,000,001 deals and actually needs a starting point? Because RAMs is a starting point, but I mean, this debate's going to go on until the end of time. How do you approach it in your context?
So I think the challenge is, and my colleagues on the panel might disagree with me, but the reality is that RAMs has very little, if any, impact on a rate card, actually. Because if you really go look at it, if Ukhozi FM is the biggest radio station in South Africa, I think it's got just short of 7 million listeners. It's a beast, right? Yet the rates that Ukhozi FM charges is, and I haven't looked at a rate card lately, but I suspect is probably 50-60% of what a 94.7 charges, right? So therefore, pure numbers from a RAMS perspective, the influence that they have on the rate card is actually irrelevant. They might have had an impact 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and inflation is built on that. But I think, in fact, the problem that what radio rates have gotten to is that radio rates at the moment is actually just inflation. It is disproportionate inflation on a set base. And if you were to reset radio rates and charge based on reach of audience, right, I think it would be completely different. So I think for me, at the gates, I think RAMS is a valuable piece of research in terms of evaluating radio stations in terms of A, their size of audience, and B, their quality of audience. But I think the debate around whether a radio station charges the audiences is built on RAMs, because otherwise, if their audiences drop in RAMs, they should technically drop their rates. And if the audiences increase in RAMs, they should technically increase their rates. It's not what we're seeing. So I think RAMs is a red herring that often gets pulled into the right discussion. I think it helps us as media people to make a decision if you're trying to reach a certain audience, which stations perform better. But I think the cost per thousand discussion in radio in South Africa is not there yet. There are a lot of stations that are now starting to have that, and us as advertisers are insisting on that and driving that home. But that's still in the early days of radio at the moment.
Nada, you got to come in here because Chris wants you to take 50% off all the rate cards. you got to tell me what's.
Well, maybe if it's Ukhozi FM, they should be adding 50% onto the rate card.
They should be adding 50% actually.
I mean, in terms of pricing, and you would only be able to speak from your perspective, give us an actual tactical example. How much is RAMs? How much is audience research? What are the metrics that are going into these rate cards that are being distributed to the media agencies?
Look, I mean, if you look at SABC rate cards, we're still largely guided by the RAMs because it's the only tool that we have, to measure our audiences. But we do understand as well that advertisers are looking for environments and not just the numbers of people that are tuning into a particular radio station or a particular show. And that is why we are now starting to integrate other elements like your social media activity of the particular presenter or the particular show. I mean, we have presenters that command 2 million followers on Twitter, for instance, and they would be presenting a radio show that only attracts maybe 250,000. And so you would see that there is no relationship there. Clearly, this person has a lot of reach, and there's a lot of people that believe in, in this presenter as a brand, and that we need to take into cognizance when we're talking to the advertisers, because people follow the presenter, and people listen to the station on different platforms now than they used to in the past. So it can't just be about RAMs and the terrestrial reach of the station. We have to consider all the elements that support the station or the particular show. So the cost per thousand, yes, it's still a very big debate. But I think right now with the economy the way it is and advertisers looking for value for their money, we're going to have to look at more or use more tools to determine our rates.
Certainly value is key to the discussion. Just picking up on some of the comments coming through on the live stream, Sipho Kutle is commending Hot 91.9 on this powerful initiative. Harlan wants you to definitely share how you've done this all, Lloyd, in terms of lock and load. Watsila is asking a question, which I'm going to get to with Chris in a second. But Lloyd, let's come to you with kind of value and distilling what the value proposition is. How do you go about articulating in sort of a sentence or two, what is the value proposition of radio in South Africa in 2020 on day 56 of lockdown?
It's pretty much to make a meaningful difference, to understand what the advertisers are looking for at this point. And I think price point is going to be key.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it seems like there's a lot of work that has to be done on this price point. Chris, I mean, budgets are obviously getting tighter now, right? I mean, what's happening amidst this crisis in terms of what you're seeing from a media buying perspective?
I think that's the scary thing, right? Is perceptually, if you ask the man on the street which media types from an advertising perspective should be doing well right now, I would imagine everybody would say, oh, Facebook and Google, right? I don't know whether you saw, there was recently a release made by Alphabet, the holding company for Google, saying that they're going to release that their profits are going to be short this year because of loss of advertising revenue. So there's I keep using these cliched sayings, but there's the other saying that I love using is saying when the tide comes in, all the boats rises, and the same thing when the tide goes out, all the boats sink. Right? At the moment, the tide's going out. The reality is that as businesses struggle, advertisers are spending significantly less. I can tell you now, from having chatted to some of my friends and colleagues within the industry and looking at our own numbers, anything between 35 and 50% less advertising spend in the month of April than what there was in April in the years gone by. So that's an astronomical number, right? That is huge. And that's all money that goes towards these media owners. And everybody's feeling it. I think maybe the guys like Facebook and Google might be feeling it slightly less, but they're still feeling it, guaranteed, right? So I think as a media owner, I think if everybody's spending less, you have to fight that much harder for your slice of the pie. And I think that's what Nada spoke about earlier on as well, and I agree. Is what is that value that you can now offer to advertisers? You know, if an advertiser had 100 Rand to spend in the past, now they've only got 50 Rand to spend or 35 Rand to spend. So the battle is on, ladies and gentlemen. So what are we going to do to make sure that we get that 35 Rand?
So Nada, take me inside with what Chris is saying, the boardrooms of the SABC, where you're hearing people like Chris say advertising spend in April is down 35 to 50%. OPEX is down 0%. In fact, if anything, it's up a little bit because we now have 1,000,001 safety precautions. We've got to quarantine presenters, we've got to quarantine producers, we've got to remote broadcast, we've got to do all these things, we've got to get permits. There's so much operational stuff that's happening that you have to deal with. How do you strike that balance between operationally keeping a station on air at the moment? And at the beginning of this lockdown, you know, there was a lot of sort of radio presenters saying, well, will I even be able to get to work? How do you strike that balance between operations and then putting your revenue cap on and understanding that operation costs are staying exactly what they are, but this crisis is cutting everybody's ad spend?
Mm-hmm. Look, operations costs are not going to stay where they are. I think when all of this is over, we're going to be counting our losses because, I mean, the remote broadcast, everything. I was in a meeting where somebody was saying, no, but we're not traveling anymore. Aren't we going to make any savings? And I thought, it's not going to be significant savings because if you're coming to think of it, we've been doing events. We travel because we're going out to doing events. And a lot of those events were income generating events. So if we're not doing OBs that clients are paying for, we might save, 30 Rands here and there, but we're losing the 500 Rands that the client was going to invest, in the event. So we're still going to be seeing a lot of losses after this. But we have to keep our heads high because stations are still on air. They're still delivering what South Africans are expecting them to deliver. We just have to offer, new opportunities to clients. And that's what we have been preoccupied with, offering new stuff to clients, and making sure that we're also there for the people and making, a meaningful difference in their lives right now. And there's a lot of clients that are coming on board, to say, I would like to be a part of this. A lot of clients, are not selling their products anymore, but they're selling patriotism and support for the communities that have been supporting their businesses in the past.
And certainly it's that, sense of community that resonates very strongly in the context of something like Hot 91.9. Lloyd, I want to ask you, what has surprised you from an operations perspective in terms of keeping the station on air, keeping everything happening in these past sort of 56 days that you may take with you moving forward? I mean, are the big fancy studios still necessary? Are all the people in the office still necessary? Should a salesperson have a desk? What are some of the things that you're seeing now that you've had to adapt to that you might actually want to include in your long-term habits?
I think it takes us back to day one of the launch of Hot 91.9. We started this radio station with 3,000 Rand. We pretty much didn't have anything. We wore multiple hot hats. And I think that has sort of been the DNA of this radio station, where we said we were going to have fun from day one. And even through the lockdown, we continue to do that. The team continues to work, obviously, on almost a skeleton staff. We're fortunate, unlike big radio stations that have massive overheads, and I know Noda would probably be in that position. And I think, sorry, Noda, I just wanted to also congratulate you on the initiative, especially the education initiative right now that the SABC is running. I think it is absolutely phenomenal what you are doing.
Thank you.
So in terms of what we've taken, Hot 91.9 has always had this fun sort of family feel. We haven't been elaborate with any of the spending that we've had, and we've seen a sort of big community drive come in from our community here, and lots of support from our advertisers, lots of support from the people in and around this radio station just to keep us running. So whilst many radio stations have seen significant knocks, yes, we have seen a knock as well, but you know what? We're able to keep the lights on. We're able to continue helping people within this community.
Chris, on the commercial side of things, shareholders in sort of more private radio groups or people that are just, the bean counters that are interested in profits are going to say, well, it's fine if you drop the costs of advertising on radio, but that doesn't mean that we can necessarily cut the profits. So it's going to have to come from an operational standpoint. Do you think that there's enough efficacy in terms of how South African radio stations are being run? Are there too many people doing one job? Should there be a DJ at every hour? If you had to give sort of a recommendation to radio from an operations perspective in SA, is it oversubscribed? Could they be doing things more efficiently?
Geez, I've never worked a day of my life in a radio station, so I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to comment too much on the operations of a radio station. All I can tell you, maybe let me put it from a perspective of operations of a media agency. From a media agency perspective, the way we've looked at it is to say, well, listen, we have, as a group, we have 200 staff members. Within a question of 4 days, we moved every single one of those staff members to working from home. Our second biggest bill that we pay every month is our rent and occupation, right? You have to say, well, as an organization, that has to be something that we have to review. Having our media people sit within the client's business themselves. So we've had to review literally every single thing in terms of how we get remunerated, in terms of how our business is structured, in terms of how we prioritize our expenses. Fundamentally, and I suspect every radio station will do the same. I think that, like I said earlier on about not wasting a good crisis, I think a lot of radio stations are going to use this opportunity to go back towards to reprioritize expenses. I think businesses as a whole is doing that. So I suspect radio will do the same, and realize that if you go look at podcast streaming at the moment, how many podcast streamers? I mean, we saw. I don't know whether you read the news about Joe Rogan going to Spotify. Spotify's paying him $200 million or something stupid like that. What's the cost expense that he has? Very, very little, right? So I think the concept of audio is going to be reviewed entirely, and a lot of people are going to try and find ways to make this work in a far more affordable way.
I'm glad you brought up podcasting because it always seems like somewhat of a point of contention among South Africa's radio community. You know, the traditional radio heads will always say to you that the numbers aren't there. Then some people don't even necessarily know what those numbers are because the metric isn't, you know, it's perhaps a little bit more advanced than what Rams is, giving people a book and they record what they've listened to and so on and so forth. But certainly, I mean, you know, it's when you start playing in that digital space, there's other platforms that offer you, you know, how long was it listened, all sorts of insights that you may not necessarily be able to get from podcasts yet. I want to speak about podcasting from a community radio and a PBS sort of standpoint and how you feel that might start coming into the mix and what opportunities you think that might present for advertisers in the future. Nada, from a PBS sort of standpoint, podcasting, is that on the table at all?
Of course, it is on the table. We have noted that in some of our stations, you know, the downloading of podcasts has grown phenomenally. A station like SAFM, for instance, that you know, carries a huge audience that is affluent, that can afford the data costs and everything, and that doesn't have time to sit and listen to the radio, that are always on the move. SAFM's podcasts are growing phenomenally. And there's an opportunity right there for advertisers. But also our African language radio stations, we have stations like Thobela where there are dramas, for instance, are more downloaded than any other program on the station. So those are instant opportunities that we can share with our advertisers. Yes, right now the data isn't so reliable because it's a new phenomenon, but we do have data that we can share with advertisers, and there are opportunities that we can build around our podcast because they definitely are growing.
So Lloyd, now there's something new to sell, which is podcasts. So first they wanted the station's Twitter account for their campaign, then they wanted the Facebook one, then they wanted the Instagram, then they wanted the presenter to drive the car, then they wanted the presenter to do a live read about the car. Now they want the presenter to make a podcast about the car. How do you decide where you're going to put your energy?
We've been very, very fortunate at this radio station, considering that our talent are very, very well known, and podcasting is something that is going to be key in terms of one of our drivers here at Hot 919. You know, there's only so much we can do on air in terms of content. We're only allowed a few minutes on air to do something, but we've learned that we could expand so much of that. You know, we're fortunate having a guy like Jeremy Mansfield and doing our morning show. Jeremy has a love for cooking, so we've had more and more of our clients come to us going, listen, can Jeremy please do a podcast on cooking? Mark Pilgrim is a tech guy. So there's a lot of stuff that, you know, really can't be discussed in detail on air, but it allows us this additional platform on a podcast to actually do that. So we see quite a large amount of our revenue in the next couple of months coming off podcasting here at Hot.
And Chris, the big question, well, what is it worth?
That's the $1 million question, right? Or should I say the $2.50 question? The challenge with the traditional model of advertising is that you buy audiences. We spoke about this earlier on, right? So if you come to me and you say, well, listen, I'm going to have a, let's use running as an example. If you're going to say, well, we're going to do a podcast on running and we're going to get the podcast sponsored by Nike as an example. I think the challenge with it is your reach is relatively small, right? So it is that balancing act that advertisers have to start striking between quality and quantity of audience, right? Somebody who is tuned in a lean-in manner, listening to a running expert talking about running and why the new Nike whatever shoe is the most apt shoe for running, I think does have to have more value than reaching millions of people in another way. The challenge, I think, with podcasting, though, is how it's going to get priced, because the reality is when we talk about podcasting, so let's use Joburg as an example. If you want to advertise in Joburg, there are 10 commercial radio stations that you can choose from. If you want to advertise in podcast, you're competing with the whole world. It's the same thing with the internet, right? In that your podcast competition isn't the Jacaranda FM versus the 94.7 versus the Cause FM podcast. Your challenge is that your competition could be a podcast about running from a runner in Japan. So from a commercial perspective, where the money goes is going to be interesting as well. So the two discussions for me is the quantum of money that could go into podcast, and B, where that money is going to, because you're competing with the whole internet. Sorry, just the last thing I want to just add on to podcasts. Sorry, and a little aside, I think as an opportunity though, for me in terms of localization of podcasts, I think is still a big opportunity, and that's where I think, to my earlier point about international competition, that everybody has to get it right. So one of the interesting fact, one of the biggest podcasts in South Africa at the moment is actually the Soccer Laduma podcast. So Soccer Laduma, which is basically a soccer newspaper, that is they produce podcasts, and I think they are arguably the biggest podcast producer in South Africa. Talk about supposedly a consumer that doesn't have access to data, but yet they are podcast hungry. They're doing incredibly well. So I think there is that balancing act that South African media owners need to strike, with not trying to compete with Joe Rogan, not trying to compete with the Japanese guy who's talking about running. Try and compete with what you can offer in South Africa about South African content that South Africans can only find in South Africa.
Well, Chris, you've given me a great segue to this question for Nada, because certainly a massive part of that differential is going to be language. Because if it's in a language that people want to be communicated within, it's certainly going to be differential in terms of differentiating it from overseas. So Nada, this question is from Lyndon, and it says, ALS have traditionally been undervalued by advertisers compared to the overvaluing of, say, for instance, a private English station. What is your narrative to the marketplace to address this?
It is very true that ALS has been seen as traditional, poor, and all of these things that are quite negative. We've done a lot of research and a lot of engagements with the advertising industry in terms of, looking at ALS differently, because even though your 94.7 might have, 90% of their audiences in a particular LSM or SEM bracket, and you compare that to Ukhozi, the same SEM bracket on Ukhozi will surpass the total number of the entire station, the entire 702 or 94.7, which means that it's really not true that these stations do not have, in their audiences, people that are upwardly mobile, that have the disposable income to contribute in the economy. So we are driving that narrative quite hard, because the statistics are there. The numbers don't lie. We know the progress that South Africans have made in terms of growing their middle class. So it's no longer a reason to sideline African language radio stations, this class argument. Yes, traditionally they have been undervalued, but we have incredible presenters. We have incredible people that are working right now in these African language radio stations, and they've really developed the offering, and even the listeners are developing along with them. So the narrative is changing. It's not an easy thing to do, because we still have people that are stuck in the past, but it's definitely changing.
Yeah, it's an incredibly valuable point. And I think, the other thing maybe to bring into the conversation at this point is that unfortunately nothing operates in isolation, right? So we can have a conversation around, podcasts, African language podcasts, but then, Otsile on the live stream points out something very valuable, which is that African language podcasts will stay low until data prices become reasonable. That's just my opinion, because we're also playing, when we start talking about streaming audio content, this data game, which is, a telco conversation for an entirely other hour that we have to do at some point. Because there's so many things that go into this mix in terms of how people are accessing radio and audio content in South Africa. Lloyd, what do you think the future of how people will access audio in South Africa looks like? And tell me if it's a dumb question, because of how varied everyone in our country is and the massive discrepancies between people.
Well, it is varied right now. And I just wanted to clarify something as well. On the topic of podcasting doesn't compete with radio. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that it works hand in hand. It cannot work in isolation. I think right now podcasting is actually more of a threat to print and to magazine advertising than anything else, as opposed to radio. And to just go back to your first question, I think, where things are going to. I think radio is still extremely strong at this moment in time. There are many people out there that saying that, well, in the next 10 years, radio will be dead, or the next 15 years, and podcasting is going to take its place. We've been saying that for years. Radio has never proven to be more stronger than it is right now.
Chris, talk to me for a second on day 56 of lockdown, and trying to keep everything kind of running. When everything is so unpredictable, when we are questioning how much we spend on radio, when we're questioning how much we spend on TV, when we're questioning where people are spending their time on lockdown, when we're thinking that everyone's watching Netflix when actually they aren't and their numbers aren't as good as they are, how do you work with a team of people whose job it is to get ROI, and now it's even more compounded than what it is? How do you work with them that this actually isn't all just a little bit overwhelming, and that there's something exciting about everything being so up in the air and everything being so fluid? Or is there no excitement at all? I mean, how are you motivating your team at the moment?
Look, I think from our side, we're very, very fortunate, and that from a team perspective, our team has really stepped up from day one, and there's not been any issues at all. So I think it is about the type of person that you work with. I think media people as a whole need to always be looking for something new, so to change the trend as you move along, right? So I think that has helped us a lot. But I think for me, it's been around clarity of communication. I think firstly, consistency of communication, right? That you always honest, always clear, and always consistent. And I think, like I said earlier on, I think this is actually an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. And the type of people you want in the business are the people who look at this crisis and say, well, listen, here's an opportunity for me to do something new, for me to do something better. And I think that's more or less where we are at the moment.
And Nada, from your perspective, I mean, commanding the amount of people that you do on a daily basis at SABC Radio, there are so many moving parts. There's also this added layer of having to serve the country over and above trying to turn a profit and keep the kind of lights on. What are you saying to your team at the moment, to the producer that now has the advertiser that wants them to tweet, Facebook post, and get the presenter to do the link all right at the same time?
Look, I think life as we know it, we're never going to see that again. And I think everybody has really caught on and understood that we have to reinvent ourselves, we have to do things differently. I mean, we were all scared when this lockdown started. The SABC is a huge organization where a lot of people can just fall through the cracks. But there's a lot of people that have surprised us. There are people that have become stars during this crisis because they've come up with more ideas on how we can move forward with certain things, and people are just within reach. There's not a moment where you call somebody and you can't reach them, and they are so willing to assist. So yeah, it is a very bleak moment, but everybody is seeing the silver lining. Yes, there will be people that are skeptical and negative and are depressed, and we try by all means to take them along. Chris said it, it's very important to communicate with clarity at a time like this. But I think overall, everybody has just stepped up, and they are doing the best they can to carry the country forward. And it is a huge responsibility, especially for the public broadcaster. I mean, in terms of the government departments, the NGOs, everybody is expecting the SABC to broadcast their messages free of charge, because everybody's message is more important than the other. And you have to make space in your schedule to accommodate all these important messages that are coming from all corners. So it's given people a lot of work to do. So people sometimes feel tired that it looks like we're working more during a lockdown, more than when things are normal. But, what can we say? It is a new normal, but you have to keep the team positive. We have to keep constant communication and we've tried to stretch the resources to everybody so that there's no one who's left behind.
Well, certainly, I mean, there's a lot of sort of narrative coming through at the moment around, you know, the human spirit in all of this and the sort of enviable task of triumphing in the face of adversity, because we all are faced with an incredibly uncertain adversity at the moment in the form of COVID-19. You know, the word that really comes to mind is this word community. I don't know. I mean, I've heard countless people speaking about it. It's the first time they've ever engaged with a neighbor, obviously on WhatsApp because they're not allowed to see them. But, you know, a lot of us don't even know who the people are that live in our complexes. Now that we live in our complexes every single day, we're a little bit more connected on the WhatsApp group that usually is an annoyance to everyone because it's the body corporate just going on about something. And I think that there, you know, is this sort of move towards us kind of being a little bit more accepting of one another, because we are, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime and potentially yours as well, going through something together that we are all actually in, whether you're in Johannesburg, South Africa, or you're in New York City, USA. COVID is a threat to you. And obviously it affects people in different ways and the severity is varying. But all of us can say that we're afraid of something called COVID-19 and we're in that boat together. There's lots of little ships around it, but that boat is the same. And so this word community really comes to the fore, which is why I want to come to you with this question, Lloyd, which is kind of a really practical one. And maybe you can share some practical advice here from Anel, who says, I'm a presenter at Radio Helderberg 93.6 FM, a community station in the Western Cape. We've been hit hard in terms of the pandemic from a finance perspective. Can you touch on the importance of community radio and the future of these stations and the people that are scared every month now with, you know, what this bottom line looks like?
Yeah, I think a lot of community stations are quite afraid at the moment. I mean, we've been in conversation through the National Association of Broadcasting on how we're going to assist community radio stations. And, you know, all I can say is that you just need to stand in there together. I know that it was extremely, extremely tough, but remember why we got into radio in the first place. It's about a passion. It's about being there to make a difference in somebody's lives. And we can see that the moment we turn that microphone on, we get butterflies in our stomach. We know that we're making a difference. We know that we're changing somebody's lives. I mean, I see it on a day-to-day basis here, just the WhatsApp messages coming into the radio stations. And sometimes it's not about the money. It's about a simple, thank you so much for keeping me sane through this time. And that's what makes community radio so important at this point in time. So yes, there is a concern about money with community stations, but you know what? Go out there and put the best offering that you can. Don't go with the same things that you've been offering people previously. Don't go out there with that 30-second brand awareness ad. Go in there and take what you can get out of advertising from somebody right now, because you know what? Once the airtime is gone, it's finished. So make what you can right now without prostituting your brand.
I like the term brand awareness. You know, the one point that we haven't touched on, and we have to start kind of landing this and sort of finalizing the questions on the live stream. But the one sort of aspect we haven't spoken about is the demand on South African creatives and creative agencies to also have better campaigns for radio stations where they are feeding the campaign into the radio station. And Chris, let's talk about the role that creativity plays in getting ROI out of radio. Because if you are slapping a 30-second commercial on 7 different stations that all have different, you know, tonalities, I mean, is that a sustainable model? Or do the creative agencies need to also do more with less, translate the ad, tailor it to the audience? What is the creative community doing, and how could they do better?
Yeah, it's a great provocation. I think that I was on a call 2-3 days ago, actually, where a couple of the marketing, it was the Marketing Association of South Africa. They had some CMOs talking about what their demand is of the agency. And there was a brilliant provocation by a lady called Kinsani Nomanda. She's the CMO of Nedbank. And she said that that they were going to shoot a television commercial just before lockdown started. Obviously, I think they were supposed to have a pre-production meeting just before the first day of lockdown. So obviously everything got cancelled. However, they still had the cast for the television commercial ready. And what they ended up doing is they ended up using the cast of the television commercials. These guys shot mini commercials on their phone that were then sent through and are currently being flighted. So it shows you how the opportunity is still there, right? And all of a sudden, from they might have spent millions of rands on getting everybody together in one space with a camera crew and the whole setup to try and shoot the television commercial, to now having a guy sitting in his living room with his cell phone shooting a piece of content that he shares, and it starts getting used as in digital and television platforms. I think it's a great example of how agencies should adapt. The old adage, Nelson Mandela said that if you speak to a man in your language, then you speak to his head. If you speak to him in his language, you speak to him in his heart. And I think that's where the SABC is so critical, right? And I think when people get lazy about producing content in home language, I think it's absolutely disastrous. So I think a lot of creative agencies are going to realize soon that you can do something. You can shoot it. You can record it on your phone. You can get the station to record it. You can get the DJ to record it. There's very many different solutions. So let's not let this crisis go to waste. Let's make sure we use it to go produce that local content. And I think everybody, including creative agencies, are showing real grit at the moment in terms of changing and adapting.
Nada, would you pick up on that sentiment? I mean, you're on the receiving end of that final ad that 15 different creatives have been a part of, that have gone to a studio, that have spent the day figuring out if the voiceover artist should say and or and. I mean, you're on the receiving end of that creative. Is the creative that you're getting for your stations strong enough from the advertising community? And what would your message to them be?
You know what, the creative that we getting, in fact, right now, we're not getting a lot because, obviously a lot of clients are not spending, and it's becoming more and more difficult to record stuff. And, to counter that, we have offered our own personalities, to shoot some of the, not shoot, to record, the ads, and, do voiceovers and things like that, just to make sure that we get the messages out there for clients, because we've got these resources at station level. They don't have to go to, big agencies to be executed. We have the creative people at every radio station that can put together an ad within a very short space of time. So a lot of clients are exploring that possibility, because stations have been in the past, had problems, especially African language stations, of ads that come ready-made from agencies in Johannesburg, who would pick somebody up who says, I'm Xhosa, and yet the language that they are not, that they are speaking on the ad is not even, Xhosa as it should be spoken. And there would be this back and forth to fix the ad so that it meets the standards of the station. So we really have to come up with new ways of doing things, and we encouraging the advertisers, to speak to the stations and see what it is that they can offer. We've got drama departments, we've got, in fact, the expertise is in the provinces when it comes to African language radio stations. So yeah, that's it is a challenge right now to get ads through, but there's new ways that we have to explore now.
And Lloyd, you've almost answered the question of how creatives in South Africa are doing, because you've become your own creative agency through something like Lock and Load, where you just make the ad. There's no 3-day-long brainstorm and then 16 creatives in the room. And certainly sometimes I think the scale does demand for that, but certainly there are other ways to get a message kind of out there.
I think right now people are not looking for creativity in the ads. They're looking for realness in the adverts. That's what people are looking for. And in fact, Chris touched on that point when it came to making big TV productions. It's no longer you need 16 people with cameras. You need one person with their cell phone. It's got to be real. And I believe in the old adage right now, keep it simple, stupid, and that's what works.
Well, next time we have to bring in some of the acclaimed creative directors in South Africa that love making those massive television commercials to speak about the role that they play in our ecosystem. It is just so multi-layered. Nothing is in isolation. We got to land it now. The question was, what turns advertisers on to radio? And everyone started with a really positive sentiment, as you would expect. But if we had to summate it in a sentence, in 2020, on day 56 of lockdown, as we're all facing unprecedented times and all in this boat facing this global pandemic, and marketing managers are scared not only about their budgets, but their salaries as well. The answer to the question, what turns advertisers onto radio?
I'll go first. I think the answer for me, I think in short, is flexibility or adaptability, whichever word you want to use. I think if you go look at, if I ask you now, all right, what's going to happen next week? You don't know, right? I think nobody knows what you know. There's so much uncertainty about the future. The guy who can come to you and say, listen, phone me this morning and you've got your ad on air at 3 o'clock this afternoon, like Lloyd and his team are doing at the moment, those are the guys who are going to win, the guys who can offer you that flexibility. So flexibility for me would be, and there's a lot of other words you can use, but I think for me, I think flexibility that radio offers is fantastic.
Lloyd?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is that when you advertise on radio, you hear it from a friend. And the key words that come to mind, in fact, Chris, you nailed it. Flexibility is key. Real, immediate, price point, cost effective.
And Nada, your closing thoughts, what turns advertisers onto radio?
Right now, we're living in very difficult times. I think value for money is one of those things that turns advertisers onto radio. But flexibility and agility, you know, the turnaround times, which is a very, it could be a challenge when it comes to a large portfolio as the SABC, but that's something that we're working very hard on to improve our turnaround times for our advertisers.
Well, Chris Botha, Group MD of Park Advertising, says it is about flexibility. Lloyd Motheray, Station Manager of Hot 91.9 FM, says it's about friends. And Nada Wachela, Group Executive at SABC Radio, says it's about value. And they all agree that all of those three words coming together is perhaps what turns advertisers on to radio. Thank you so much for joining us in this Arena Events presentation, a presentation by the South African Radio Awards as well. And we hope to see you again soon.